We are on to Week 7. The Patriots managed to get past the Kansas City Chiefs in a great matchup last week. We'll see how that affected the top 5, but we start, as usual, with our power rankings at the bottom, brought to you, of course, by mybookie.ag. We'll talk to you a little bit more about them later on. Let's get to 32 through 21. The New York Giants and the Oakland Raiders, they are not doing so well.
Yeah, and two teams that we like their under this season going in, with the PFF Elo system being the sort of the main driver here. Both teams are struggling, I think, in the most important position, and doing so in a very uninspiring way, right? Both Eli Manning and Derek Carr getting rid of the ball more quickly than almost any quarterback in the league, and both doing so very ineffectively on basically short passes, praying that their supporting cast will rescue them, and that simply hasn't happened so far.
There's some big-name quarterbacks whose teams fall into this group. I'm thinking about Andrew Luck, Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, and Matt Stafford. All their teams not doing so well. So which of those have maybe the quarterback plus the supporting cast to best move up this coming week?
Yeah, I think it's got to be Houston, just because that division is as poor as any of them, right? The best team in the AFC South has a 3-3 record. Houston has a 3-3 record. So while we don't like their team in general, we do think that there is a possibility that they could be 9-7 and come out of that division with a playoff berth. And even though we probably won't have them anywhere near the top 10 as a result, they'll probably jump out of the bottom 12 here.
Big game for them this week in Jacksonville. Interesting thing about Deshaun Watson is that his numbers aren't nearly as sexy this year as they were last year, but he's playing better, and that should give you and Texans fans a little bit of hope for them going forward if they can somehow find a way to cover. They've got a great receiving core, maybe the best receiver in the league in DeAndre Hopkins. All right, let's go to Hard Rock Stadium in the top, or 20 through 10, I should say, where Brock Osweiler, for lack of a better phrase, he pulled a rabbit out of his head in last Sunday's game against the heavily favored Bears. That line jumped all the way out to, I think, almost 7.
Yeah,
7 some places. Yeah, 7.5 before game time when Ryan Tannehill got scratched. And it wasn't like Brock Osweiler played great. He got a lot of help from a lot of ancillary pieces there. So the Dolphins teetering at 20 now. Do you see them moving up or down going forward?
Yeah, I actually think this is an interesting thing. So when they made the playoffs in 2016, our numbers did not like them at all. They were a team that was in the bottom 10 in our ELO systems, our ranking systems, despite being 10-6 and making the playoffs. Last season, when they started 4-2, they were still in that bottom group. And so now at 20, I think what this is reflecting is the fact that Adam Gase is getting a lot more out of his team than their grades would suggest. And so, for me, I see them in a weak AFC. I think that they can get in as a wild card, but I don't necessarily think our grades will like them enough to have them elevate maybe into the top half of the league. So I like them at 20 here, even if you're optimistic about their playoff hopes.
Another team that we see here in this middle group are the Jaguars, a team that a lot of people like to come out of the AFC this year. And here's the thing with the Jaguars. They were relying on defense. And we know that defense is not very stable season to season. And a big reason for that is that one injury here, one injury there can make a part of your defense much weaker, and the offense dictates where they go with the ball. So that can really expose some things. And I think that's what we're seeing with Jacksonville so far. Dallas just roasted them with Cole Beasley out of the slot this week. They have, as we've mentioned previously, the Houston Texans coming into town. We'll see if they can sort of patch things together defensively, and then if Blake Bortles can find what he found last season, which I don't think has as much to do with Leonard Fournette as many people would probably want to believe.
Yeah, I think this was a predictable one as well. As you said, defense is very unstable, so even if they fall into, and they're not a bad defense this year by any stretch, but they're simply not the best anymore, and when that's the case, a team like Dallas can put up 40 on you, and when your offense is reliant on Blake Bortles and a running game and kind of a weak offensive line and receiving core, that's how you drop from a team that goes from the AFC Championship game a year ago to in the middle of the pack in the NFL now.
We'll get to the top 10 in a second, but I want to talk about one more team in this group because there's some interesting ones. The Seattle Seahawks. They have gone, it seems like, run the gamut from just total terrible play, just awful embarrassingness, to destroying a team like the Oakland Raiders, who we have at the very bottom of our chart. So Are you a believer, or do you think this was a little bit of catching a team that is playing really poorly at the right time?
A team that they remind me of is last season's Arizona Cardinals, right? So if you had, for example, their win total was like 7.5 last year, the Cardinals actually went over that, even though they had Gabbert and Stanton and et cetera. Like, I think if you have a weak enough schedule and you win the games that you're supposed to win, even a team like Seattle, which no more Legion of Boom, defense is a little bit weak, I think, in terms of personnel, offensive line has issues, you can still win enough games. So for me, I believe Seattle can get to 8 or 9 wins. I'm not a believer in them as a team necessarily as a contender, but I do think that, with San Francisco still twice on their schedule, Arizona on their schedule again, I do think that they can, at least get to 500 this season.
Yeah, the Seahawks and the Packers are sort of in similar situations where a lot of different parts of their team are not playing well. They have stud quarterbacks, and the aspirations are to make it to the playoffs and contend. I think people are probably much more bullish on the Packers, though they did just struggle with the second coming and C.J. Beathard last night. All right, before we get to the top 10, I want to tell you a little bit more about mybookie.ag, because that's where you need to go to place any bets on future Super Bowl or win total options that you might feel good about after listening to this video. Mybookie.ag offers every bet type you could possibly want, whether it's season long, Super Bowl, or just individual game. They have great customer service, and they make it easy to cash out. We both use it. One of the things we like best is their in-game live betting, which you can take advantage of. So go to mybookie.ag, use promo code PFF to get a $1 match on your first deposit. It's pretty simple. PFF plus MyBookie. You play, you win, you get paid. All right, the top 10 here. The Atlanta Falcons creep back in. We have Baltimore and Minnesota there in the middle. Pittsburgh just outside of the top 5. Which of those teams do you see moving up this coming week?
Yeah, I think by virtue of who they're playing, I think Atlanta probably will win against the Giants and possibly move up here. The Chargers are getting a Tennessee team that I think is a little bit weak, across the pond there. So I think either one of those teams can move up. What's really interesting is if Baltimore beats New Orleans, even at home, I do think that they'll be, have a case to make to be in the top 5.
That would be one of the marquee games that we'll be looking at. And as we go into the top 5, we see the New Orleans Saints, who started this season with a lot of question marks after their defense just got torched in weeks 1 and 2. They have now ascended into the second spot. So do you believe that team has what it takes to stay at least in the top 3?
Yeah, their defense played pretty well against a Washington team on Monday Night Football 2 weeks ago that is good, right? Washington is leading the NFC East, and New Orleans did a pretty good job rushing the passer and covering in that game. Their offense is going to be what drives everything, right? So if they're in control of games, I think their deficiencies defensively will be more of an annoyance than something that keeps them from being a contender here for the Super Bowl. They I believe, have the third most projected wins by our simulation so far, so they are very much one of the front runners in the NFC.
It's interesting to look at the Saints and the Chiefs, two teams who their offense is spectacular, and there are questions on the defensive side of the ball. The thing with the Chiefs is that they get to play in an AFC which is by and large a lot weaker, so I think there's probably a little more to look forward to for the Chiefs in terms of a playoff run, but I wouldn't sleep on either team just because I think when you look at today's NFL and what's going to win you a Super Bowl, you need to have a dynamic offense. So let's look at the Patriots here, who there were a lot of question marks in September. October comes around, and a lot of those have gone away. Yeah,
and they've had a relatively easy schedule so far. They have a relatively easy schedule after. So their path to the possible 1 seed in the AFC is not easy, but it's also not impossible here. I think one of the things that you saw against the Chiefs was the fact that they can beat you so many ways offensively. They can beat you with Gronk as a tight end. They can beat you in the running game now with Sony Michel, and they can beat you out of the backfield with guys like James White and in the slot with Julian Edelman. So they are, I think, a complete team offensively, and their defense is not as poor, I think, as people would lack to give it credit for.
You're trying to make me laugh here with the run game comment. Their run blocking was nice against that Chiefs team that can't defend the run to save its life. So take that what you will. Okay, we'll get out of here on this. The Rams sit in number 1, unsurprisingly. If a team is going to jump them over the next couple of weeks, who will it be and why?
Yeah, I think it's probably New Orleans, right? So New Orleans plays, they have a really tough schedule moving forward. I think the most difficult in the NFL by our system. If they can, despite that, win those games, that's what the rating system will like. I think the Rams, they get Green Bay in a couple weeks. They've struggled the last 2 weeks to cover against teams like Seattle and against teams like Denver, who neither one of us would say is a championship contender. So they have some cracks that I think that New Orleans can exploit if they continue to improve.
Yeah, I think we could see a switcheroo here in a couple weeks. I'm a believer in the Rams, but look, I'm a fan of change. So I think change is going to come, and I'm going to agree with you. I think the Saints, if not the Saints, the Patriots are the team that I would see taking advantage of an easy schedule, starting to just continually stomp on teams and move up to the top spot as we approach the start of the season with Thanksgiving right around the corner. Remember, head to mybookie.ag and profootballfocus.com to get much more of the content that we have for you. Listen to the PFF forecast, which will come out on Thursday.